Okay. Can artificial intelligence technology win America's Got Talent? This is one of the questions I want to discuss today, as well as explore hyperreal AI generated content, the metaverse, and Web3. And to do this, I'm really looking forward to this. I have Chris Hume and Tom Graham with me, who are the co-founders of Metaphysic. And anyone who has not heard of them, they have just performed on America's Got Talent and have turned the singer Daniel Emerald into Simon Cowell on stage using hyperreal AI generated technology. So this is super cool. You've also been involved in the deep Tom Cruise things that have gone viral on TikTok, where you created deep fakes of Tom Cruise and Paris Hilton. So this is all super excited. I want to learn more about your America's Got Talent experience and how you see this whole technology making an impact in the future. So welcome, you two.
Hello, good
Thanks for
morning,
having
Roger.
us.
Such a pleasure. Where are you joining us from today?
Both LA.
Both in LA. Excellent. Very
Yeah.
good. So tell us a little bit about your background then. When you when you got on stage at America's Got Talent, you mentioned that you founded this company, Metaphysic, but then this was the first time or a few days before your appearance on the show that you actually met in person. So
hmm
I believe one of you is Chris, you're from Belgium, and Tom, you're from Australia originally, but now live in London.
That's correct, yeah.
Very good. So talk me through this. How did this all happen?
So we actually, met in person for the first time before that performance, which was a month or so ago now, maybe a little bit longer. And that came about because we started our company during COVID. And there are very few people with Chris's expertise or that really are kind of involved in this space, creating hyperreal synthetic content with big neural nets. And so, when we're building the company, you kind of find people out there in the community and they're randomly kind of spread around the world. And so that's how we kind of grew the company and our base of expertise. And it just so happened that through fate and chance, Chris and I never managed to connect with lockdowns and travel restrictions until that fateful day when we
Yeah,
both
and
came to LA.
the crazy thing is nowadays you don't actually need to, huh? And
Yes, I would say that it has not made an impact at all
no,
on our company. Yeah.
very interesting. So you're an entrepreneur. This is your background. Chris, do you want to take us through your background?
Yes, I've been a VFX artist for about 10 years. And the way I learned my craft was always by improving my techniques by doing, for example, YouTube tutorials. And that's how I grew from a cameraman, doing video editing for YouTube videos for a radio station in Belgium. And in the end, I was doing all the VFX commercials for the biggest TV company in Belgium. And that's when I saw the technology of AI in a news outlet where they were talking about it, and that's when I realized creative possibilities. So I jumped on it. I started experimenting, and then I made my first viral video where I made Jon Snow apologize for season 8 of Game of Thrones. It was a funny video. It was a parody, and that's when I got contacted by international journalists for the first time, and that's when I fully jumped on it and I made it. My mission to get good at it. And now we're sitting here. I met Tom, and it's been an amazing ride.
Fantastic. So Tom, tell us more about Metaphysic. What's the plan there? Where do you want to take the company, and what what are you offering?
So at Metaphysic, we specialize in kind of creating the software that is automating the process of creating hyperreal synthetic content at a really big scale. So you could imagine that Deep Tom Cruise, or if we do a thing on America's Got Talent, it is, one character, but then maybe there are up to 40 different neural nets which are contributing to that kind of output. Um, so multiple models, one character. But in the future, we believe that what we think about as the metaverse today, which is kind of like a visual interactive layer on top of our internet experience, as regular people, we are going to participate in that in a much more profound way. And it's not going to look so much like the gaming metaverse or the cartoony metaverse that we see today. It's going to be a lot of us doing everyday things, like doing this Zoom call inside a more immersive virtual world. And that may be, your office there, where we could render out that exact environment and all sit there around your desk. And then hyperreal synthetic versions of regular people like us, our faces, our voices, are going to interact in a way that we can consume and watch and interact and drive, to generate kind of a human experience in the metaverse, which is much more substantial and rewarding than what we get today. Zoom is great, but looking at videos of each other is not as good as being in person. And so we think that 80% of the time that we spend online will move towards these more synthetic content interactions, and they'll feature regular people. So that's billions of people worth of content. The only way to create that at scale, cost efficiently, is to basically take data from the real world, capture our perception of reality, our faces, our voices, our biometric data, iPhones, camera phones, imagery, and voice audio is really the way to do that. And then interpolate that, use AI algorithms to create the latent spaces in these models that interact with each other to create these virtual worlds. And this content by default in these virtual worlds, these content experiences, is going to look exactly like real life, because the input data, the training data, looks like real life. And the output is going to just be the same. You can, of course, excuse me, put a lot of creative things on top of that, but the baseline is going to be reality inside the metaverse rather than cartoons or highly curated, highly produced, expensive productions. So that's how we're going to get it to scale, I think, the only real way. So that's what we really focus on at Metaphysic.
Very good. So maybe, Chris, you can talk us through the technology underlying all of this then. I think I heard you say that in the past it took you a month or so to create certain clips, and nowadays it takes a few days. I guess the vision is that in the future you can just have a platform that allows all of us to create our own avatars. Is that the plan?
Yes, that sounds exactly where we're going. But we're not only just focusing on how quickly we can deliver things, because the hardware is upgrading as well. The technology itself is upgrading as well. So the output is of a higher quality. Nowadays, I can make 100 different versions of a Tom Cruise, for example, 100 different deep Tom Cruises, and not one will be exactly as how the real Tom Cruise looks. So we're not just focusing on doing it all quicker, but also making it more one-to-one, spot on in certain ways, right? If you want to do a commercial with Ronaldo, for example, well, then you would like to have Ronaldo exactly as he looks. So it's not just about quality; it's also about likeness, and also training these models in general has been a real thing. You can only learn it by experimenting with it, nurturing the data, how these models react to certain data. It's it's a thing. It goes step by step, but we're making it all quicker and more efficient, output.
Very good. So before we talk about all these super exciting topics, what was it like to go onto America's Got Talent? I mean, when I saw both of you appearing on stage in front of the panel, in front of the audience, that must have been a crazy experience. What was it like?
Nerve-wracking. Yeah, I don't think either of us were really prepared before we arrived in LA for how big the production is. It's really incredibly professional. The reach is immense. I don't think we really comprehended how big it is, and then how it really is kind of a mainstay for the entertainment industry, for people involved in singing and all kinds of different performing arts. And so it was very humbling to be there with all of those people who are amazingly talented doing their thing.
Very good. So you are now in the semifinals that are coming up. How can you top superimposing Simon Cowell onto a live singer?
Well, we had this conversation before a few months ago. When we knew we were going to do America's Got Talent, of course we wouldn't know what the reaction was going to be. But we were talking about what would we do when we go to the next round. And what I said was really simple. Look, when you've got your back to the wall and you have to raise the bar and make it better, right? That's when you come with creative solutions. And I think that's exactly what we did right now. We went for quality. We went for a challenge for sure. So I'm looking for words of what I am allowed to say about it. So quality wise, it will be better. We'll be also multiplying certain things. So I guess it's a normal continuation of what we were doing. Um, and with the first audition, I just think as an artist, when you see these people stand up and give you how do you say that in English? An ovation. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, that's that's when that's what makes you happy, right? So I'm hoping
Absolutely.
we can do exactly the same this time. And
Yeah, good,
wow.
good luck. Good luck. I hope it goes really well. I think it's a great opportunity to showcase the technology and show a vast audience what this sort of technology can do and where we're going with all of this. In terms of um, other real world applications, then beyond what we're seeing there, I can see how this could transform the entertainment industry to some extent. I have written and talked about ABBA Voyage, for example, and how amazing that is to see ABBA as avatars on stage. I have worked with other companies to create my own avatar, which I'm now using on TikTok. This is all super exciting stuff. But from a where do you think the business, the biggest use cases and the business impact will be for this sort of technology?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that we focus on heavily at Metaphysic is, some of the things we've been talking about, which are very, very high level entertainment, high production, high quality outputs. We also focus on the other end, which is kind of more what can we do at massive scale today? And so our platform called Every Anyone, every any dot one ONE, anybody can come and create their own hyperreal synthetic likeness, where we find inside the latent space of the big model that we have created exactly the AI representation of you, which is hyperreal. And so what you can do with that is use that same model to change some vectors to tweak your look, to make you the male or female version of yourself, or anything in between, older, younger, really change your hair. Basically, anything we can manipulate inside this large programmable understanding of what a human face looks like in a generalized sense, um, is the first step for us as Metaphysic, moving towards kind of an internet where there is a lot of content created by a lot of people, and they're using AI algorithms to do that. But the important thing there is the input data. So your biometric data around your face, your voice. Sorry, I'm losing my voice now. Um, is essentially what makes you a human, right, in the real world. It was what makes you unique and individual, and so that's also the only data required in order to create a hyperreal synthetic version of you in the metaverse. And what we hope doesn't happen is that large corporations or bad actors use that data to create versions of you without your consent, your permission, or without your direct interaction. And so the best version of this is where what we're trying to create with Every Anyone is such that you as an individual own and control your data. The data that you bring into the internet and then use to train content creation algorithms should belong to you. And you should be able to delete it. You should be able to choose where and how you exist in the hyperreal metaverse, in this internet which is coming. And so that is one of our core goals. And that kind of, to your question around, where is the business model, as it were, enabling people to interact directly with content and allowing developers to create hyperreal interactive content is a very interesting place to be in the future of the internet. I think that in the same way that we went from, a lot of internet traffic being emails and stuff like this, and suddenly the volume shot through the roof when people started posting videos. It's this rich, interesting content that people want to consume, and it takes up a lot of bandwidth. The metaverse will look like today. We're doing kind of email equivalent of things. We're playing games with small avatars with no legs. It's really fun. It's interesting, but it is cartoonish. It doesn't really engender the full variety and complexity of human experience. But when that does come, it will be a Cambrian explosion of opportunities and content and experiences that people can build for themselves and bring other people to interact with. And that will restructure how we coordinate as a society, how we think about time and memory and knowledge. And also it will, lead to kind of like a refactoring of how we consider human rights, because the Web2 world, we're happy to give up our data and our online identity in exchange for really good, amazing products. But when in the future, in the hyperreal metaverse, when we're giving up what we look like, who we are, the ability to make us say and do anything, that's a fundamental human rights problem. That's not something that companies really want to be involved in, I believe, nor will governments allow them to be without, regulation. And at the center of that is consent. So, the consent of a person. So there are many business models, that we think about in terms of content creation, helping developers create this hyperreal content, helping individuals prove their identity, helping them control their data. And then obviously on top of that, we think about some of the entertainment use cases where we can bring someone back to life and they can deliver a concert. ABBA is a great example where that wasn't, there's a small portion of that which was AI, and that the team that did that at Disney, at ILM, is now our team at Metaphysic. But a large portion of that was CGI. And so it'll be possible to create something like that at the same scale, with the same spectacular audience experience at a fraction of the cost. And so these things are coming. They will arrive before regular people like you and me, we can go onto a Zoom and roam around our gardens or our favorite childhood places or something like that and have meetings or just hang out. But when that kind of synthetic content arrives on the entertainment stage, it will begin to change how we think about what the internet can be and what's possible.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And for me, the consent and the challenge of misusing this technology is so big, because suddenly we can make leaders of states say things that they never said, and it looks hugely real. When I look at the Tom Cruise deep fakes on TikTok, I find it really almost impossible to detect whether they're real or not. And I guess many millions of people watching them also struggle. I just watched today the one where he's going out with Paris Hilton, and so if you got both of those coming together and looking so real. So I guess, Chris, when you first started creating those, there wasn't consent, right? But now there is a partnership there. And how did this come about?
Well, when I first started these videos with Miles, the first thing we said is like, look, let's make some videos that make people smile, because that's what we do. That's what I do in all my videos, but also to raise awareness, right? Like, for example, 20 years ago, people didn't know what Photoshop is. Today, everyone knows a photo can be faked. Now, to create this level of hyperreal face swap videos, it's really difficult to do that. Even faking a photo is difficult, it seems like, because you can detect when something is fake. So it's really important to show the world that it is possible. and that in the future people will be able to do such things, not in the coming years, but in the future.
Mm.
And that it's important to think twice. Whatever you see on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you see passing by, always think twice. It's with regular news as well. Always filter it. So after a few videos, we did have contact with Tom Cruise's management, and we let him know, look, if there's any issue with what we're doing, and with that I mean we're not using it for commercialization, we're not using it for product placement, we're using it for light-hearted humor videos. So if there's any issue, we would want to give the account up and use it to promote your next movie. We'll take everything down, whatever you would like. And they confirmed they got the email, and they just didn't get back. They just let it go on. And still today, if it ever would happen that they wanted to take us to take it down, we'll do it immediately, of course.
Very interesting. S- where do you see all of this going? If you were to say, this is what I'm seeing, the future of the metaverse, the future of AI, where do you see some of the biggest impacts of this technology? How will it transform our world in the medium term? Because everything you're showcasing here is super exciting technology, but we are still looking into the future, right? Because using the technology that you're using, you use big AI models on top of real actors that look like those people. I guess you picked Daniel because his facial features are quite similar to Simon Cowell's, probably to some extent, and then you were able to overlay your models on top of that. Um, so and we can't use it yet, but if we look at how fast this technology is evolving, when will we get to a stage where we have this technology, and where do you see the biggest impacts? Maybe Tom.
Yeah, so I think that Daniel actually, we worked with Daniel because he's such an amazing singer.
Yeah.
And the if you really drill into it, the face is not really like Simon's face at all. Is a real big difference, and uh, that's often the case. To be honest, it's not so common to find such a great match, but the technology is so robust, and if you can imagine that the AI model creating the actual face swap is one element of maybe 25 different things in kind of a proprietary pipeline that we use. Many of those things leading up to the AI model are about working with the underlying face and the performance and making that appropriate to have the face swap put on top. So there's a lot of technology that wraps around, say, the algorithm. And a good kind of heuristic for that is if you were to consider, Chris's work on AGT, but Metaphysic, the whole team's work on AGT, as kind of 10 out of 10 for Hyperreal. And I can tell you that the next installment, the next episode is going to be much, much better. But if that's 10 out of 10, if you were to just take kind of like the raw output from one of these models, it would be a 1 out of 10, and it wouldn't even be vaguely real looking. It would be, you wouldn't be able to just output that and convince somebody that it is really Simon Cowell or not. So like any kind of data science pipeline, there is a lot of ancillary work on, before and after the actual model part, which makes the whole process extremely difficult. And, then, which from a society point of view, in terms of how we roll this technology out, which we hope happens in a very deliberate and thoughtful way, we have to think about what happens when people have wider access to these kinds of technologies. And so built into our DNA at Metaphysic is this idea that we will be thoughtful and considerate about how we deploy the technology, but then how we allow other people to use that technology. And, some in the public sphere, you can learn more about that. We created a conference series called Synthetic Futures, which is kind of the place where the industry has nuanced and interesting discussions around the impact of hyperreal synthetic media or synthetic media in general. So that's syntheticfutures.org. But in general today, it's very, very difficult to do. And that's why, to your point around some issues around political misinformation, you don't see a lot of content which is like this. It's very difficult to create. So I think to your question about, what is the future look like? In the near term, I think it is more about, from our point of view, it's what we can do to raise awareness among regular people that media can be manipulated, and maybe you should take a beat before you send that on, or before you see some kind of video online and you become outraged or have a particular emotional reaction. But then in the future, when as an industry, as society, we work out how to deploy this technology in a more sophisticated way, we will be able to do amazing things where we kind of dislocate ideas around location and having meaningful human experiences, which really deeply feel like reality. So you could imagine that, the future of school will be, you'll have some kind of local element to your school, and you'll do socialization, and it's really important to be there physically with other people. There's no substitute for that. But then instead of going off and reading books or going to online tutoring classes, you may step into, for a couple of hours a day, a classroom with a world expert. And that world expert is teaching you about a particular subject, and you are there surrounded, and you can interact with students from all around the world wanting to learn about the same thing. So you're no longer kind of, as a child on this journey of learning, stuck in your physical location. You're not bound to that necessarily, and you can get some of that deeply immersive, formative experience out of participating in this interactive kind of environment. And that interactive environment could be 3D, immersive. It could just be watching yourself on a screen interact with other people, kind of like you're playing Doom 3D for the first time. But that is one example of how the ability to have meaningful human interactions that feel real will restructure how we think about society, economies, how we interact. And there are a myriad of other potential implications which are very, very positive and interesting for society. But we do need to do the work as technologists, as regular citizens, as regulators, as people involved in entertainment. We need to do that work to make sure that what we bring to this world is safe and deliberate and considerate. And that is not necessarily the way in which technology has been developed in the past, right? So this one's a big one for that, because we're talking about the fabric of reality, not necessarily like my cookie data or something like that. So yeah, it's really interesting times ahead.
Very true. So the same question to you, Chris. Maybe you can answer the question of how far away are we from this being universally accessible and to a level that today requires all your amazing skills, and what do you see as some of the biggest impacts, or where it will create big transformations in society?
Yes, as how far away, there are a lot of nuances to that, like what is far away. I think in the short term, we'll be able to do translations, or maybe even live translations in the metaverse, having a meeting with a foreign company and having these live translations being held place. So we're somehow skipping the language barrier. And it depends, as in what's the next step. And for me, when I think about what the metaverse means to me, is like Tom said, and he worded it perfectly, and that's me, because I live on the other side of the world. I would have to have a real life breakfast with my grandparents, because what I do now is I travel back to Belgium a lot of times because I just want to see them, and then I go back. and I just want to have breakfast with them. And it has to, and having that feel hyper real. They're sitting there with some glasses on or with a contact lens, and we're having that breakfast. We're having that connection. I think for me, that's the ultimate experience in the metaverse, feeling that connection. And then 20 years from now, when maybe my grandparents are not here anymore, I could revisit that memory and I could walk through it because it's hyper real. It's all saved in the cloud, right? And I could even show my children that specific memory and who what my grandfather was. For me, that's the ultimate metaverse experience. And again, and I get back to the models and the nurturing of it, and we're making big steps. It is really difficult to give you a number right now. But if you compare where we were like a year ago, quality wise, and what we could do to what we can do now, is a huge step. And it's just going quicker and quicker. And things like America's Got Talent, what we're doing, it's just increasingly making us step up from what we did before.
Very good. And in terms of impact, where do you see the biggest impact in terms of society?
I think we're going to have a second life. So we'll have two lives. One will be here on Earth, how we walk and talk and eat, and the second life will be the one in the metaverse. You can compare it to and that's why I always thought like World of Warcraft, it's already some kind of metaverse, right? So just imagine being there as if you're walking there, you're doing everything, you're actually working there, making money there. So I think that's going to be the big impact. Is we're going to have two lives, and they can be separate. They can be in sync somehow. But I think that's the big impact, and I know it sounds fake, but it's huge and it's coming.
Just to that point about timing, like today, any person can come to anyone, our platform, and create a hyperreal synthetic avatar of themselves. And it's strange, right? Because you take an image of yourself, and the output after a couple of minutes of processing on a really profoundly large computer, the output kind of looks like yourself, right? But it's not. It's really an AI model of yourself, which is with its own latent space representation, such that now it exists in the world in a sense, and you also exist in the world, and you both look exactly like each other. And today on Anyone, you can change your facial expressions, you can change your age, your gender, do various things like that. But you could imagine that changing things around your face, which seem very trivial and inconsequential, like what I just described, it's only a small step to changing the way in which your lips move inside the model to replicate how you would sound out words, right? So that is not a huge jump compared to the huge jump of, as humanity moving from computation that we did 10 years ago to AI models to neural nets. So I think that things will move faster than people expect, and we are working on ways to bring regular people into maybe just like limited content experiences where they can bring themselves into these content experiences. And that exists in the metaverse. It's not a full-blown game with thousands of people playing at the same time, but it is the prototype for what the internet is going to be, and how computers will build representations of us that we need to be in control of in that metaverse. So it's going to be fast, really.
Yeah, I find this an interesting debate whether we will have a hyper real reflection of us as we are in the real world, or whether we will tune this a little bit and make us a little bit more like the way we actually want ourselves to
I can
look.
tell you, people
right?
are going to tune the shit out of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But then where do you stop? Because if people wanted to look completely different, this is only the start, isn't it? So I just find this really interesting to imagine this parallel world, the metaverse, and
this
what
is fascinating.
it will look like.
Yeah. So a lot of people, when they think about the metaverse, they come from a gaming perspective, and that's really informed by kind of a escapist, digital utopian vibe that has a lot of roots in libertarianism, computer scientists being involved in the movements like this, Ready Player One, Snow Crash. It's this kind of idea that here is reality, but I'm going to make this new world, and I can be anything that I want to be, and I choose to be there, and I'm going to put energy and time and thought into creating this character, and I'm going to be anything. I'm going to be, sexy robot unicorn. That's what I'm going to be. But when you kind of think about what real life is, and this idea that we are going to have to do more and more things online which involve a visual element of us, there are many things that you do every day where you don't have that kind of, you don't want to turn up as a sexy unicorn. You don't have time to think about rebuilding a full identity. So for instance, doing a parent-teacher interview, you're not going to turn up as anything other than yourself. Trying on a dress at the Gucci store, the online virtual Gucci store, you're not going to do that as something other than what you look like in real life. You may have a digital version of that dress or that skin, right, that Gucci is selling. But if it's literally you're trying it on to buy it in real life and it's going to be shipped to you, you're going to try it on with yourself. And an amazing thing about humans is that one of the reasons that we understand what's hyperreal and what's not, we can tell whether something falls into the uncanny valley immediately, is because we've spent an entire lifetime, our big brains, an entire lifetime trying to understand what is a real human, what is a fake human, what people look like. Faces, we have this incredible articulation and fidelity for what is real and what is not. But part of that process is building an identity for ourselves, which is extremely highly tuned. And, we're happy with our appearance, we're sad with our appearance, we struggle with something in between, and we change over time. And so people have built up this visual identity for themselves over their entire lifetime. And that's really very sticky, right? It's kind of hard to really decide that I'm going to be robot unicorn in the metaverse, and that's going to be me. And the more that the metaverse begins to bring and create content experiences which reflect things that we do in the real world, the more that people will just kind of tend towards being who they are in the real world. One, because they don't have the time to rebuild identities. And two, because, that's what people are comfortable with. Now that, kind of switches over into the real world. What do we do with our identities? We do our best to look the way that we want to, right? And so absolutely, I believe that there will be, the L'Oreal fall season 2026 makeup filter for the Hyperreal You, right? Or what you can do creatively on top of this technology is profound, extremely cost effective, and really so much more than what you can do today. So people will build all kinds of things on top. But I predict that there won't be a metaverse where the bulk of human activity inside this hyperreal metaverse will be from, robot unicorns or weird avatars. It will mostly be just ourselves plus, the modification to look the way that we want, because we're talking about the interface between the real world and the metaverse, and that can't be such a stark distinction to have a seamless interaction between the two. You can't go to work every day as robot unicorn and then turn up in the office and no one even recognizes you, right? Like no one allows people on their big Zoom calls at work to use crazy avatars all the time. It's just not. I don't think that's happening anywhere in a really big sense. And so that's, for us, the prediction about the future is about this kind of not rebuilding a new world, but extending reality and extending human experience. And then you get into all kinds of interesting stuff about, could you consume that experience faster because you can play that reality in the metaverse at 3x speed? Can you be in different places at the same time? All kinds of fascinating things.
Yeah, and I guess in the future we'll have probably 3 Gucci dresses. We'll have one for the real world, one for our digital avatar that looks like me, and one for my robot unicorn.
Yes, yeah, and what's really interesting also is that we're talking about this interface between digital worlds and the real world, and then to make deeply interesting personalized content for the digital part of reality, you need to recreate my perception of reality. I want it to be me. I want it to be inside the context of the house that I live in, the places that I go. I don't want to be in some kind of like weird office block that was designed by somebody. That's not where I want to hang out. So these same algorithms allow us to import physical environments that are deeply personal, and maybe contain large amounts of private data and information about my life that I should also be in control of, but also physical objects and items. So, my favorite vintage Gucci dress, right, that I may want to scan that just by taking images of it, and then the AI algorithms will do the hard part of building that into a model that I could wear around inside the metaverse. So this idea of bringing things that I own, not just the generic one of 2,000 Gucci dresses of this particular version, but actually importing my perception of reality as physical objects or physical spaces. That is the same process really as bringing my face and my voice and a hyperreal version of me into these spaces. So we will have, the NFT versions, but we'll also be able to go to the Gucci store and buy a limited version of that. And maybe they will customize it in real life. And then I will scan that. And by scan, I mean really just take photos of it and bring that personalized version into the metaverse. And, it's not one of 50. There's nobody else who has it. It's really deeply my thing. And you can imagine that in how we kind of can imagine your child's 5th birthday party, right? And normally we're all of the age where we go home to our parents' house, or we've got like the photo album, and there's one photo, and all the people are gathered around the table and the kid is blowing out the candles, and you can imagine that scene in your mind's eye, and you can imagine it like you were, because you were there, right? Maybe you were 5 years old, or maybe it was you were watching your kids, but we could capture enough of that private experience, that deeply interesting memory, in a way where the different actors there, the different people, you could bring somebody else to this experience in the future, and they could have a like an interactive experience inside this memory, right? So the way in which we structure how we capture memory and human knowledge will be really interesting when we can go back and relive it, rather than just look at like a photographic artifact. Photographs are such a profound advancement in how we think about and structure memory. Before photographs, we did people from the Middle Ages, we just really don't know what our relatives look like, right? Past a certain point. And now we're talking about the next step in this evolution is for us to be able to experience things with them, with people from 50 years ago, in a way that is just like us being there. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. And I could talk about this forever because it's just mind-blowing, the possibilities that there are. The other topic I wanted to touch on, we've touched on this a little bit throughout the conversation, is Web3, blockchain technology, NFTs. If I heard you correctly, you think that those technologies will be a way for us to control the likelihoods of me and maybe my voice. So I could store my biometric data in the blockchain or in some sort of NFT, and therefore control where this goes, and then potentially use this technology to detect if someone is misusing it. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah. So, there's no, there are lots of different ways in which a person could find themselves inside a hyperreal content experience as, an AI version of themselves. One version is where you give your data and all of the permissions to a company, and that good company goes and creates a version of you and puts it inside this environment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and that's what we do all the time, right? We have our money at banks, and banks are private institutions, right? We don't have any control there. There's no decentralized governance, but there is a lot of regulation, and governments step in to protect individual users against the self-interest of privately run banks or other institutions. And so private companies owning and controlling our data and creating these experiences for us is a potentially good way to do it, as long as there is like reasonable regulation and oversight and control, where somebody is looking out for the interests of the individual, the user, the human, rather than having a corporate optimization for the best interests of a shareholder. But now we talk about Web3, and so a relatively recent development in how we can conduct governance, but then also mediate trust between institutions, between individuals, companies, regular citizens, developers, etc. And that is a really positive development in our ability to coordinate as a large group of people in a trustful environment without centralized incentives or control. And so what that means in the context here is if we can create protocols, platforms, a paradigm, a way of thinking where individual people can, in the context of open Web3, be in control of their data, but then also seamlessly interact with private companies who want to create content experiences in a way where everybody knows that it's my data, that I know my data is safe, that I know that no one is going to use my data without a positive consent, which may, me logging into their privately run content experience platform with my NFT that represents me. So it's like me logging in and giving consent is logged on the blockchain or mediated through the blockchain. That is a really desirable place to be in terms of the parallel, which is just private companies control everything. So Web3 is a great opportunity for us to build something which is more human and user-centric, or at least puts the individual at the forefront of having a positive control, like being able to exert a positive action over their likeness and how they exist. And that also, the allegory there is that they become positive actors in Web3 content economies. So in the economies that exist around creating this content, if you are, as an individual, kind of an equal stakeholder with the other parties which are participating, then it's very easy for you to either pay for services or be paid for somebody to use your data to participate in these economies directly. And that, I think, for people developing content experiences today and developing the metaverse, that is a really promising thing. What it means for us when we think about the hyperreal metaverse of the future is you look at regulation of the technology sector today of companies, it's not particularly robust. It's not the same as regulation in the banking sector or regulation for corporate activities which have had a huge impact on human life over the last 100 years. You think about companies which create a lot of pollution, generally highly regulated, but technology companies have, in some way they're not far into their journey compared to people who produce coal or banks, etc. Right? So it's important that regulation comes, but it's also important that those companies work together with open technologies that put individuals into a more privileged position. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over time. The technology companies have so much money today, they create such fantastic products. Amazing people work there. They create great, convenient, interesting products, but incentives are misaligned, right? And the way in which Web 2 happened does not put people and their data at the forefront of products and product development. And so there's a tension there, and it's going to be interesting to see how it's resolved. I think that I would predict that the incentives to content developers, being able to develop content experiences and market it directly to people and mediate those economics through the blockchain, will deliver more money to content developers than going through Apple App Store or Facebook's kind of VR marketplace. So that's a very, very difficult incentive to work against if you're a centralized tech company. If developers can choose between, twice as much money as before, it's pretty hard to deal with that. So I think there'll be a great accommodation between these players. But it is a very important question for the future of humanity. Like, I'm not saying that lightly, it sounds glib, but how we structure bringing real versions of people into the internet, not just kind of avatars, not just clicking through things and having some cookie data, but actual versions of ourselves that would fool our grandmother. How we structure that is really important to the outcomes for society.
Yeah, and do you think we can have the metaverse without blockchain technology and NFTs? This is, for me, I can see a world where we have a metaverse, a more realistic 3D layer on top of the internet that we have today, without needing blockchain. But it could potentially make it so much better, right?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, on every level, we have that already. You know, people can go into massive online games, 100 people at a time, and play and interact in this kind of synthetic world. We have versions of ourselves on TikTok with millions and millions of views around the world, but we're sitting there at home. We're not actually doing those actions, right? It's recorded and it's replayed. So there have been many versions of a more expansive definition of what the metaverse is, more expansive than like the traditional gaming version, which is like VR only. It's fully immersive. It's some kind of game. There's portability of assets, etc. And so we have that today. What I think is, and it's easy for people to think about that gaming example and think everything's fine now. It's great. No problem. Like, we're doing this okay. I can play FIFA with a version of myself and it's cool because FIFA controls this stuff. But if the entire internet experience, if the 10 hours a day that you spend interacting with the internet was just like that game, it wouldn't be the same. If it was a hyperreal version of you where random companies are using your data to create, imagine your mum wakes up one day and she gets a video call from you, and you're talking to your mum over video call about some recent developments that you've text messaged about previously, things about your family, really specific things. And then you start talking to your mum about this great product that you've been trying recently and the great results you've had from this product. And it's a fully synthetic version of you, right? Recommending to your friends, your family, a product. That's the hyperreal content version of exactly what happens today, every day, billions of times a day. People use our content preferences, our data to market things to our friends and our close associates and our circles. That's, you think the metaverse is kind of okay in the gaming context without some kind of human in the loop, without greater agency for individuals. But when you expand it to that level, no, I don't think anyone feels comfortable about that, right? Even if it says Facebook ad, hyperreal generated version of me talking to my mother about kitchen appliances, which I think are really, really rad. It doesn't feel right. And so that's, some of the great work that Chris has done is pioneering, because Deep Tom Cruise in particular was interesting. It was the first experiment where billions of people were confronted with something that genuinely, it looks like it's really real, but it's not real. And hundreds of millions of people, at least for a fraction of a second, thought that it was real. And in that fraction of a second, they're transported, and it's a magical content experience. But it's really the first time in humanity, in the history of humans, where so many people at such a grand scale around the world have thought about this piece of video content and thought that it's really real, when in fact it's totally created by AI. And that does not happen very often. It will happen more and more. And so what we think about and what we're comfortable with will change over time. But it will change in that direction towards maybe we have to find ways and safeguards and rails for regular humans to be more in the loop, more in control of what happens. Blockchain, Web3 is a great one for that. Regulation is also a great thing for that. But one of those two things is likely to happen. The other one is a really hard road, basically. So, yeah, let the listeners guess which is which.
Very good. Let's finish off then with the question about your hopes for the future. Maybe Chris, we can start with you. What do you hope for the future?
I hope to bring people together in ways which we couldn't do before, even if it's not physical, even if it's by bridging language barriers. Um, and I think that's something I always hoped when I started working on this technology, and I think that's it for now. Because with the content I always create, and which we are creating with the company as well, I also hope to keep entertaining people, to keep being creative with the tools that we have, and to try out new things which people don't expect.
Amazing. Thank you. How about you, Tom? What are your hopes for the future?
I hope that people don't make fun of me for being a contestant on America's Got Talent for the rest of my life. It is an unusual but wonderful experience, and I highly recommend it. But not that many people will go down that route. I think that, in all seriousness, that I going back to that 5-year-old birthday party analogy, I have that photo at home, right? And it's in the old house where I grew up with my parents. I'm surrounded by people that I still know today, family members, some of which are not here. And the idea that for my kids, we can capture more of their history and who they are, and they can have a more interesting and immersive kind of interaction with their history, who they are, the people that they grew up with, their family. That is really interesting to me. We look at that one photograph in the family album, and we think about our family and who we are and our identity and how we fit into the world. But what if that was more? What if we all love watching, a 2-hour long movie, but reliving a 2-hour long family Christmas from when you're a kid? That's probably magical. That's probably something which is great. And for me, writ large, that process, inside a family, it's easy. But what if you could do it with somebody from a different part of the world? What if you could experience their family Christmas, or the equivalent, or walk a mile in the shoes of a refugee? It's a set of technologies which lets us build empathy among people through recreating what it's like to live in somebody else's shoes, what it's like to have real life experiences. And our lives, who we are, is a culmination of however many years of these lived experiences. So adding diversity, nuance, wider conversations, empathy, I think will be a real tonic for society when you compare it to what we've done with social media, which is kind of the opposite of that. It's more about isolating people in smaller and smaller bubbles. So that's really interesting. Obviously, you can do there are bad things that can happen there, and those bad things we all need, as citizens, as people in the media, as regulators, as people who build technology companies. We all have a responsibility to think about them and be really deliberate in how we move forward.
Very good. Wonderful. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, you two. Good luck with Americans Got Talent. I really hope the semi-final goes well.
It's going to be amazing. Chris and the team at Metaphysic have done an amazing job.
I can't wait to watch it. Yes. So thank you so much. And anyone who ever wants to rewatch this conversation, head to my YouTube channel where you can watch this one and hundreds of other super exciting conversations about the future, tech, and business. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.